Good morning, good morning. There you go. I do want to welcome you to our time together. If you've not done so, take this white booklet on the inside. Please pass that out to the side. If you could return to the middle, you'll find in there a prayer request card. And if you're a first-time visitor with us, we invite you to fill that information out so we can be back in touch with you about our ministry. So we want to give thanks for that. We're just coming out of a semi-annual meeting, which I know this may sound a little bit weird, but I love meetings like that because we hear about the ministry that you want to engage in. So thank you all for participating in that. We also voted in our new council members and new conference delegate people. So thank you all for your volunteer for that, as well as doing a blessing of the new kitchen. If you've not seen the new kitchen, go check it out. It is very, very cool in there. We have several announcements we want to share with you, Bob, if you can push me up there. Race Forward is happening on Tuesday. Ruth, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we're starting up again. We don't have a theme for sure yet, but we are for sure going to do a online program together that's from the Center of Progressive Renewal, which is part of the United Church of Christ. And they have some very top quality people that have developed this curriculum, and we're going to do it and discuss it together. That's where we'll start. We welcome anyone that can to join us. It's an ongoing process. It's not something that is once and done. So come anytime.
Yes, I want to make a special announcement to tell everyone about Marian Ministry this coming up Wednesday. It's our first time back after being off for the summer. And we have an extraordinary guest coming. Her name is Brenda Schultz. She's known as the funeral lady. And she's going to talk about all those things that we don't want to talk about, but we need to. And I hope any of the women in the church who are all members of Marian Ministry, as Betty Allen would tell us, are welcome to come. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, all women are invited to come on Wednesday at 9:30 to hear that. We do want to share with you the special offering in your little packet today. You'll find the Neighbors in Need offering. This is one of the 5 offerings we support in the United Church of Christ. We are what's called a 5 for 5 church, which means we support all of the United Church of Christ offerings. This is such an important one because it talks about ministries of justice, compassion, and peace here in the United States. We invite you to think about that. Next Sunday will be the collection of that offering. We just want to make sure that you had the information necessary for that. Thank you, Bob. We also have the Peanuts movie coming up on the 14th. That's how Debbie feels about that movie. I like the Peanuts movie, so families can come, $5 per family, and that includes the pizza, the movie, and fellowship. So please sign up on that on the youth board down the hallway this way by the office. Get your name down for that. It should be a great night for that. Also, volunteers are needed for our Sunday mornings at Samaritan Bethany. If you've not had an opportunity to do that ministry, what you're doing is you're taking residents from their rooms down to the worship experiences and then returning back to their room and doing that twice on a day. So if you would like to sign up for that, it's just an incredible ministry. Several folks, if you've done that, raise your hand so people can find you out. Check them out. Ask them what it's like. It's very, very cool because you really get to know these incredible people. But you get them back and forth to the worship experience. You get to worship with them as well. That sign up is in the fellowship hall, so we want you to make sure to do that. Get our month of October covered for that. Thank you, Bob. Also, our new website's up. Oh, man, you gotta come on, man. Need a little help. We worked 2.5 years to put that website together. It just took forever, but it's awesome. We want you to check it out. If you see something on there that's not quite right or you find a typo or something like that, it's Debbie's fault. No, never, no.
Love you too.
I love you too. But anyhow, actually, we got this out. It's very cool, very interactive. But please, if you do see something, if you see a typo or something that's not quite right, please email us. We're trying to manage and get up about 100 different pages on that site. It's monumental, the amount of information we're trying to control right now. Once we get it up, we'll be able to manage it. But if you see something, just let us know. Go check it out. There's going to be a video section. There's actually a way that you can talk back to me there on the website. So we want you to do that too. Check it out, and we'll have some conversations going on. So please go there. Rags to Riches. Diane, talk to me about what this is all about.
Okay, and I have to stand up here because I'm just getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Anyway, I'm Diane Pollock. I'm a member of the Social Action Committee. And once again, this fall, for the month of October, we're going to be doing our Rags to Riches campaign. We did that 2 times last year. It's the easiest thing in the world. Instead of us going to you and saying, hey, give us $10, we're saying, just bring your old, unwanted, unusable clothes, turn them into a bin, and that's all you have to do. We get paid 10 cents a pound for the clothes. Last year we earned about $200, $210, which, that's not a huge amount of money, but we use it for Social Action Committee to support some of the homeless ministries around town, like Link, Project Legacy, Hiawatha something, I can't think. Anyway, various, our theme has been helping homeless people, especially homeless youth. What the Rags to Riches does is you can bring anything you want. It can be good things or bad things. So if you bring, you say you have a dress that's too small for you anymore, you turn that in, they will use that to sell as a dress. But if you bring an old t-shirt that got battery acid on it and has holes all over it, then they can sell that to a company that turns it into rags and things like that. So either way, your old unused clothing gets used, and it doesn't go to a landfill or our incinerator, and it supports the church. So it's kind of a win-win all the way around.
So thank you for that. All
Right.
through October, it'll be here in the Fellowship Hall, right?
Oh, yes. Okay, I knew I was forgetting something. Usually we had the bin in the narthex, but as you know, the narthex is very ripped up, and we don't want anyone tripping in there. So we'll have the bin in the Fellowship Hall. There's 5 Sundays in October, so lots of opportunities to bring your stuff, and they will come every Monday and pick it up. So it won't be sitting around cluttering up the hall, hopefully.
Good, thank you, Diane, for that. We also want to let our seniors know we're off to the great state of Wisconsin, home of the Green Bay Packers. Anyhow, so we're heading over there. We do this every year. We go check out all the beautiful colors along the river bluff. We end up at, we go to the best Twin Bluffs Cafe, and then, of course, the Nelson Cheese Shop for a great ice cream cone. So if you'd like to go, please sign up. All members are welcome to come and join us for that outing. We will be taking the bus as we journey along. We do want to lift up a couple prayer requests, if we can. Jenny Broad's mother passed away. That service will be held on Wednesday in Chatfield, so prayers for Jenny and her family. Also, Leslie Sunick's grandmother passed away, so prayers for Leslie. Maxine Kopp is in the hospital. She'll be coming home hopefully today or tomorrow, so prayers for Maxine as well. Other items we need to lift up before we begin our worship together. Let's begin. I want to center us as we come together. I just love this psalm, and I think it's so important that whenever we come together to worship or prayer or just as a fellowship, that we kind of ground ourselves in what God is calling us to do. So I love this passage from Psalm 91. So I invite you just to take it in, close your eyes, hear it as you want, follow along, whatever God calls you to do. You who live in the shelter of the Most High, who abide in the shadow of the Almighty, will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. For God will deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the deadly pestilence. God will cover you with his pinions, and under God's wings you will find refuge. God's faithfulness is a shield and buckler. You will not fear the terror of the night, or the arrow that flies by day, or the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, or the destruction that wastes at noonday. Those who love me, I will deliver. I will protect those who know my name. When they call to me, I will answer them. I will be with them in trouble. I will rescue them and honor them. With long life, I will satisfy them and show them my salvation.
Well, today what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about this message you're going to hear from Pastor Paul a little bit later. And actually, that message is really kind of hard. And it's really a strange one to kind of understand. So the way I want to explain it to you a little bit is, have you ever encountered a time when you said something that you really didn't want to say? Did you ever go, uh-oh, I want to take that back. I want a do-over. Have you done that? Or maybe when you've played with somebody and you took their toy and they got really mad at you and they started crying and you wanted to go, uh-oh, I'm so sorry. Can I do that over? I want to treat you a lot nicer than I just taught you. Do you ever do that sometimes? No? Good for you. Good for you, because that's the way we want to live our lives. So the story that you're going to hear from Pastor Paul is about 2 individuals. One's name is Lazarus. And Lazarus, unfortunately, is a man who has a lot of problems. He doesn't have any place to live. He doesn't have any food. His body is covered with sores and owies. And he's just laying there. And there's this other man And they refer to him as a rich man. And every day that rich man walks past Lazarus. He doesn't talk to him. He doesn't offer him any of his food. He doesn't offer him a place to live. And then what happens is they both end up dying. And Lazarus is all healed. He has no more sores on his body. He's being fed. He's having just a wonderful time. And it's not so good for the rich man after he dies. And the rich man finally says, uh-oh, can I do over? And unfortunately, it was way too late. So he couldn't do a do-over. So I want you to think about every day of your life, and when you're talking to your parents, or when you've been asked to help out, or if you see somebody who's struggling, somebody new, or somebody who's hurting, go up to them and just let them know that they're there, that you care about them, and you want to be kind to them. So we don't have to live our lives with going, uh-oh, I need another do-over. Okay? So can you grab a hand and we'll say a prayer quick? You can repeat after me. Dear Lord, help me to live my life not expecting do-overs. Help me to love each other, to be kind, and to help those who are hurting. Amen.
So Debbie said that this is a hard message. I'm not sure she's talking about my sermon or the passage, but maybe a little bit of both today. I think it talks a little bit about what Thomas is feeling. From chapter 16 in the Gospel according to Luke, verses 19 through 31, these powerful words from Jesus in his ministry. There once was a rich man, expensively dressed in the latest fashions, wasting his days in conspicuous consumption. But a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, had been dumped on his doorstep. All he lived for was to get a meal from the scraps of the rich man's table. His best friends were the dogs who came and licked his sores. But then he died. This poor man was taken up to the angels to the lap of Abraham, and the rich man also died and was buried in hell, in torment. He looked up and saw Abraham in the distance and Lazarus in his lap. And he called out, Father Abraham, mercy, have mercy. Send Lazarus to dip his fingers into the water to cool my tongue. I'm in agony in this fire. But Abraham said, Child, remember that in your lifetime you got the good things and Lazarus got the bad things. But it's not like that here. Here he's consoled and you're tormented. Besides, in all these matters, there is a huge chasm set between us so that no one can go from us to you, even if he wanted to, nor can anyone cross from you to us. Well, the rich man said, Then let me ask you, Father, send him to the house of my father where I have 5 brothers, so he can tell them the score and warn them so they don't end up here in this place of torment. But Abraham answered, They have Moses and the prophets to tell them the score. Let them listen to them. I know, Father Abraham, he said, but they're not listening. If someone came back to them from the dead, they would change their ways. And Abraham replied, If they won't listen to Moses and to the prophets, they're not going to be convinced by someone who's raised from the dead. Now that's an awesome passage of Scripture if you're a fire and brimstone pastor. I could condemn you all to hell so easy with that thing. But that's not what we're doing here today, folks. We're going to hear the good news about what God's calling us to do as God's people. So as we think about that passage, I really want you to think about those characters that were depicted in that awesome reading. I want you to think, first of all, about Lazarus. I wonder if you've really even seen Lazarus. He looks like he slept on the street, probably because he did. He pushes a shopping cart with all his worldly possessions down the highway. She's the one who speaks in Arabic. He's the one that has that faraway stare in his eyes. He's a young man being sucked into gangs and into drugs because that's all that he knows. That's all that he's been taught. Lazarus. He's standing there at the corner, right at the corner where Hunt Drug is, with a sign that says he's a veteran and he'll do work for food. Maybe you saw Lazarus. Maybe you saw her at Hy-Vee this last week as she pulled off the shelf a can of Spam and discreetly tried to put it into her handbag. Have you seen Lazarus? She calls our church frequently. Almost every day we get a call from Lazarus. She's asking for a bag of groceries and some simple milk for her children. He's the quiet man who came here to worship a few weeks ago. But left here, and on the way out, he told me he felt totally ignored and alone. And she's the one who came to worship and then went into the fellowship lunch and sat with her daughter at a table all by herself, and no one sat with her. But all around her, tables filled with people were laughing and talking. And not one person, she said. Not one person came to talk. See, Lazarus isn't any one particular person. Lazarus is all the people that we run by, we rush past them, we ignore them, we step around them, we look through or totally dismiss them. Lazarus is everyone we see, but not really. Because when we see him, we see right through him. Now, it's not because we're mean or we're evil or we're unchristian. It's just that life is so full and busy, we have to draw our circle of concern smaller and smaller and smaller so that after all, we keep our lives comfortable and cozy and manageable and keep it all in order, because heaven forbid that somebody would come and disrupt our path. Lazarus is everyone that we push outside of our circle, outside of our church walls. Everyone who doesn't think like us or look like us or act like us. And so we read this story from Luke 16, and the whole chapter consists of Jesus' teachings that are all about possessions. The first part of the chapter, if you go back and read, is addressed to all of Jesus' followers, with a lesson that they should be shrewd and not naive in the ways of the world. But today's choices have consequences for the future. So now Jesus, in this passage, turns away from the followers and then directly to the Pharisees, to those religious leaders whom Luke labels lovers of the money. They were men of position and power and of privilege. Jesus fashioned the rich man in this parable to represent all those people who had everything. And it's intriguing that Luke records dozens of Jesus' parables. But in all of them, only one character ever in all the parables is named, and its name is Lazarus. Now, we're really not sure if it's the same Lazarus as Jesus' friend whom he raised from the grave, Lazarus, the brother of Mary and Martha of Bethany. But what a great irony it would be if he used his best friend in this image of being the poor beggar outside the city gates. Regardless of who it is, Lazarus is the one there. And the story is really about the name. Because the name is important because, ironically, the rich man in this story, the rich man is nameless. While the beggar, the one with no privilege, no power, no accessibility to anything, is the one who is named. Just the opposite way that the real world of power, prestige, and privilege would like to have it. Where the big boys and the big girls get all the spotlight and those in the trenches are totally forgotten. Now, the name Lazarus is so important because it means literally God has helped. At first glance, it would appear just the opposite, that God had helped the very rich man and ignored the very poor man. But Jesus, you see, what he usually does, he takes the ordinary and makes it extraordinary by turning the story upside down, and his listeners and possessions that we covet the most will never help us. They do the opposite. They stand between us and what God expects of us. So every night, this rich man with a full belly and big, rich man sitting comfortably at his table with food abundant pouring over, dressed in the finest robe, he ate his fill. But outside of his gate, right outside of his home, right outside of the doors, was this beggar named Lazarus. God has helped. And the rich man had everything, and Lazarus had nothing. He had to fight with those marauding dogs just to get a few scraps from the table and to let them lick his sores along the way because he didn't have the power or strength to push him away. I want you to think about that image, but when you do, think about the underlying theology here. People believe that the poor suffered because they or their ancestors had displeased God or they'd done something sinful, so they're getting punished for it. But the rich in those days, and even in some of the theological formations in some of our churches today, the prosperity gospel say, well, the better you are, the more money you're going to have and the more righteous you're going to be. You see, in this classic reversal of fortunes, this man, Lazarus, the named man, Lazarus, died. And he went to heaven and was welcomed there by Abraham himself, patriarch of all of Israel. But the rich man died, but he went right to hell. He was tormented. He could see Abraham and Lazarus off in a distance, and he begged for a little drop of water. And Abraham said, remember that in life you were comfortable and Lazarus was miserable, but here things have changed. Because of God, things have changed. Besides, there's such a great chasm, and no one can cross from one place to the other. And Abraham didn't need to point out that the rich man had created the chasm himself. The rich man thought of others in his families who had not gotten the message. Father Abraham, I have 5 brothers. I beg you to send Lazarus to them to change their ways so that they can be spared the suffering that I'm suffering. To which the patriarch replied, well, they have Moses and they have the prophets. If they won't listen to the messengers like these, they surely won't listen to a man who's raised from the dead. And so Jesus didn't say, well, go and do likewise. Or if you fail to listen to the warning too, you will suffer the consequences. He didn't need to. Because those who have hearts that are open and they have ears to hear and eyes to see, they'll see God's kingdom work at place that changes everything in the world and gives us a new focus. Now, if we didn't know better, we might imagine Jesus had one of those smug little I told you so faces, like he scored one for God above. But we know he only had one purpose, and that was to be an agent by which God would transform lives. Remember the words in the Gospel of John, chapter 3, God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. You see, Jesus did not come to make us miserable, but Jesus came to save us from ourselves. You see, God's order is not the same as ours. We don't know how heaven looks, yet Scripture overflows with teaching that God is radically just and will not forsake the poor or the oppressed. Think about it. Children of Israel enslaved in Egypt. Think about the children in Africa enslaved in our southern states. Think about children enslaved today on our city streets by racism and by drugs and by gangs and by homelessness and by a systemic system that keeps pushing them down, who feel like their lives don't matter at all, who feel like they have no power, no privilege. All have shared the belief that suffering in this world will be balanced by freedom and suffering beyond. Stories of every faith tradition have said that the world's order of class and caste and high and low are contrary to the will of God. And these parables and tales have gone further, saying the order will be turned upside down, where the first will be last and the last will be first. So Jesus first wanted the Pharisees to remember that God's justice is the final word. You see, I believe that as followers of Jesus, we really already know everything that we need to know, but honestly, we just really don't want to know it. God has already given the word through the prophets, apostles, and Jesus himself about those things that really matter, about justice and equality. And if that isn't enough to persuade us, nothing will be. Not a great song from one voice, not a great dance by me or traveling roadshow, even a man raised from the dead. Sudden wonders won't change the heart when volumes of evidence have done nothing. So let me put it another way. God loves all people. and will not let injustice prevail. It's in the law of Moses and the teaching of the prophets. But if you're ignoring those witnesses, if you're going to ignore Jesus' teachings, did you hear that in the passage today? If you're going to ignore that, if you're going to be part of the problem and not part of the solution, there's nothing that's going to get your attention. Jesus said it plain and clear. I thought about this today. And there's this wonderful old story. I think I've shared the story before, but it really speaks about what we're about today. There's an old story about heaven and hell where a saint was sent by God to visit both heaven and hell. And as she approached hell, she could hear the wailing and the gnashing of teeth. So was surprised to see beautiful gates beyond them, a banquet table laden with food overflowing. The people there in hell were clean and they were well dressed. There was no sign of a furnace, but they were strangely shaped. You see, these people had long arms with no joint at the elbow. They could pick up all the food they wanted to from the table, but the problem was they couldn't put the food into their mouth. So they cried in anguish as they starved. Suddenly, the old saint was transported to heaven. She was alarmed to see a very similar scene. Banquet tables laden with food, people with long arms, and their arms couldn't bend either, but they were singing songs of joy, and they were laughing. There were no cries of anguish, for here the people of heaven reached across the table, and they began feeding one another, so everybody was full and alive and well, and they rejoiced. And that story just strikes me so right on about where we are in this world today. The only difference between heaven and hell is how we treat each other and how we open our gates to each other and how we love one another. And the pain of poverty or racism is always multiplied by feeling invisible, by those who feel like they don't matter, those who feel like they have no voice, those who feel they've been pushed outside the gates and they're out there all alone, and we walk right by them. We look right through them and say, get over it. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. What's wrong with you? And we in the church have to find a way, folks. We see on the news all these issues with Black Lives Matters, and what we do, we take ourselves and we try to divide ourselves right away. We don't want to deal with that one systemic issue of racism because we'd rather try to pull ourselves if we're for or against something. And by us polarizing ourselves, by us trying to choose sides, we ignore the central issue that's so present in our world today. That outside our gates, there are people hurting. And we'd rather choose to step around, step by, and see right through them rather than deal with the issue that's right before us. We have to be the church. Can I get an amen out of that at least? There's too many people out there that feel like they've been left outside the gate of our society, of the world, of the church. But when someone else sees them, when someone else notices them, that pays attention to them, it's a transforming experience. Because you now feel like you matter. And who you are as a child of God is valued. But make no mistake, the wisdom of the story is that we have so much often felt in our lives that they aren't as rich as outward appearances might suggest that we are. And we can get it right. One of my favorite authors is Barbara Brown Taylor. I know some of you have read her. If you've not read Barbara Brown Taylor, please, please, please read her. She's an amazing woman. She says this about this passage. What they do not seem to know, what we still do not seem to know, is that we are the victims of our own way of life. When we succeed in cutting ourselves off from each other, when we learn how to live with the misery of other people by convincing ourselves that they deserve it, when we defend our own good fortunes as God's blessing and decline to see how our lives are quilted together with the lives of others, then we are all losers. Not because of what God will do to us, but because of what we have done to ourselves. Who do you think fixed the chasm in this story, she asks. Was it God or the rich man? Sometimes I think the worst things we have to fear is that God will give us exactly what we want. You see, the world didn't get turned upside down by the actions of just a few, but by the inactions of so many people over generation after generation after generation. You and I are not going to turn it right side up all by ourselves, but together, one by one, day by day, we can show Jesus' transforming love to others outside of our gates and even in our walls. You see, you and I, we are called Peace United Church of Christ. We are called as Peace United Church of Christ to swing wide the gates that divide us and look out beyond the gates, beyond ourselves, beyond our comfort, beyond our privilege and our power, and really see who is lying out there needing us to invest in God's radical love in surprising ways. To each time you bring food for Channel 1, or you each time you give a couple of hours to serve at Family Promise. We invest in God's radical love in surprising ways. Each time you look at a street person in the eye, holding up that sign, not just walking by them with disgust, but look at them in the eyes with compassion and love and hear their story. We invest in God's radical love in surprising ways when we invest ourselves in our LINK program to help our homeless teens in our community. And each time we pause and welcome the stranger to hear the story, we invest in God's radical love in surprising ways when a friend walks in these doors and they're sitting by themselves and we take the time to go and welcome them and sit with them and to hear their story. Because it saddens me, folks, when the Lazaruses of the world make their way inside of what should be a safe sanctuary, into the house of God, and they find themselves walking away from God, not accepted. That's hard. See, we invest in God's radical love in surprising ways each time we actually see Lazarus, rather than seeing through him. And when you do see and know one another, you are passing along a life-changing love of God to someone who can pass it on again. We who have privilege, gathering here for worship also have the means to heal many hurts in the world. And we are called to open our gates, to reach across the chasm, to swing the gates wide open and welcome everybody in and let them know they are loved. I pray that this ancient parable, this hard message filled with such simple but powerful wisdom, will take root in our hearts deeply this day. And that when we leave here and these doors open, we just don't walk away and walk by and walk through. We find a way. We find a way to love one another. That's my fire and brimstone today, folks. Amen. Okay. So we have to go out in the world and serve now. It's a hard job, but it's a great job that God has called to do because we are called to go and to serve and to be God's people. I'm going to invite you to please rise because this message, this prayer talks about what we're called to do as we go out into this world because this is our church. Others will feel welcomed.
If I am welcome,
It will do a great work.
if I work,
It will make generous gifts to many causes.
if I am a generous giver of my time, talents, and treasures,
Worry for social justice and for peace.
I advocate for marginalized communities, practice peace in all settings of my life.
It will be a church that embraces all, that builds community, that grows faith and transforms lives.
If I, who make it what it is, practice these things,
Therefore, with the grace of God, we shall be a safe and inclusive church living God's radical message.
I dedicate myself.
So I want you to think about this before you go on your way. Are you the rich man in the story with no name? Or are you Lazarus? Wherever you are, always be open for what God is doing.